Welcome everyone to week 9. Today's programming topic will be about how JavaScript, which we learned last week, connects to the kind of HTML and CSS that we've been working with. But first, let's go into some announcements. So homework 7, which was due today, is now being moved to next week, with homework 8 staying the same. So homework 8 will be released today, and both of them will be due next week. And that's because we didn't post the recording and slides, which we'll get out today. Lab 6 will be due Monday, April 8th. And the final project will also be released today. So you guys will get your first look at it. Grade reports will be sent early in this week, or I guess next week as well. And yeah, you can check out our showcase website. It hosts a whole bunch of the kind of projects we've had in the past for our finals. Maybe some good inspiration for you. But yeah, a little bit more detail on what the final project is. The final project will be released on Notion. And the idea is to create your own website from scratch. You have entirely your own creative freedom on this, from design all the way to coding. So your goal is to create a hi-fi mockup by next Tuesday, which the date is wrong, but we'll get that fixed, and get it checked off by a TA during their office hours in order to get the 3 points. So similar to the midterm process. If you don't get it checked off, the maximum score you can get is 29 out of 32. Final project will be due April 22nd, the final project will be due. So yeah, don't start coding until you've gotten checked off for the design. Okay, so this is kind of the agenda for our coding section today. We're gonna have a little review on what JavaScript variables and functions look like, a new concept of objects, how JavaScript and HTML meet up in the DOM, and also adding and removing CSS classes with JavaScript. So first, let's do a little review. So we have these things called variables, which are like the same thing in math, where they store some value and we give it some name. So in this case, we have like a name variable that stores the name Asia, or we have an age variable that stores the content of 21. In both cases here, notice that like we can store different types of data. Like one of them is a string, which is basically just some text. And then in the bottom case, we have like numbers, which are stored a little bit differently, but that's not super important. What's important here is kind of the syntax of this, which is like having this let word in the front, which tells us that we're defining a new variable. A useful name, so in this case, name and age are very appropriate for what they include. And yeah, in the case that we're storing text, we have to make sure that it's in quotes, and this is what's called a string. A little bit more complex with that, we can do like math with those variables. So in this case, we have a let age equal to 20 plus 5. And the computer automatically does the 20 plus 5 calculation for us. So at this point, our variable should be 25. Age should be 25. Following that, we have age minus 2.5, which is, this is incorrect because we aren't assigning this value to anything. So we calculate age minus 2.5 is 22.5, and then we do nothing with that value. We just kind of throw it away. So the third line is kind of how we're supposed to use these variables, which is we can then set age to a new value of age times 2. And so this case, it would be 25 times 2, which is 50. Any questions on how variables can kind of do math for us? All right. So yeah, this is kind of the other concept we learned last week, which is functions. And functions have a really kind of crazy syntax, but it makes sense once we break it down. We have a first step, which is defining the function. So the code is not being run, but it's getting ready to be used. And this has some very specific syntax with the function keyword, and then we give it some name that's specific to what we want it to do. We have these parentheses, and inside those parentheses, we can include any inputs into this function. Then we have these like curly braces, and the inside is like what we're actually gonna do. So in this case, we have a greeting variable that's being set to howdy plus name plus an exclamation point. And then we have an alert of greeting. So can anyone tell me what this function will do when we pass in miles in this case? Kylie, any ideas? Yeah, it'll say howdy miles with an exclamation point at the end. And yeah, don't worry about the alert thing. The alert is just putting it onto the web browser. But yeah, we can do kind of complicated math with this as well. So we define a squared function here that takes in some variable x, and it returns x times x, which is squaring the number. So yeah, this return means that we output this value when we call the function. So in this case, we have a let y equal to square of 5. So y would be set to the value of squaring 5. In this case, it would be 25. Can anyone tell me what z would be equal to? Yeah. Yeah, I think you got the concept. I think it's like 125. Oh wait, is it? Oh, you might be right. I think you're right. My bad. I can't do math, but great job. Okay, great. So yeah, now we know the value of z, and we can keep on doing this to get really complex numbers. Yeah, it can get really, really huge numbers. Yeah, so now we're going to introduce a kind of new concept, which is objects. So yeah, objects are a way that we can describe more complex pieces of data, so not just some text or some number. Instead, it's like maybe some text and a number and like some other information about something that we're talking about. Really kind of vague description, but it will make sense in a bit. So yeah, when we write code, we're trying to convert the world and how we describe it in English into a way that computers understand. So yeah, basically the idea is that complex things are made up of simpler things, just a lot of those simple things. So for example, we have a car here, which in this case I think is a Tesla. But yeah, so objects are JavaScript's way of representing complex items, and they're built up of two different things, which are methods, basically the functions that we learned earlier, and properties, which are the variables that we learned earlier. So the idea of creating objects is to explain what they're doing in English before converting them into code. So this car, can anyone tell me some of the properties of this car? Like what we might want to store in a variable? Kathleen? How might we describe this car in terms of properties? Yeah, so color might be one variable. In this case, what would it be equal to? What would the color variable be equal to in this case? Yeah, perfect, perfect. So yeah, these are a couple of those examples. So we have like the color, the model of it, its current miles per hour. So yeah, it doesn't have to be a set property either. It can change over time. But yeah, so can anyone describe any functions that a car might do? Yeah. Yeah, drive is a good one. Any others? Honk. Honk is a very unique one. Any other ideas? Cool, no worries. Yeah, so we have like drive straight, we have brake, we have change color. We might also have like steer left, steer right. But yeah, basically the idea in my head for these is that properties are usually nouns, things that are like things or adjectives, and functions are more like verbs. Yeah. So yeah, we have these properties and functions now. So we're getting closer to code, and we can change them into just like the code way of writing them. Does everyone kind of see the leap that we made here? Cool. Okay. So yeah, this is kind of the concept of what an object is. All of those properties and functions in those boxes are all put together into one object. So this is how we would write the car object in JavaScript. So we have the car, let car equal to some curly braces, and then we have each of our properties and each of our functions all inside of there. So we have a color, and then a colon, and then its value, and then model, it's a colon and its value, MPH, oops, sorry, MPH, it's a colon and its value, and so on and so forth. So yeah, these are our properties, and these are our functions. So yeah, that's a lot of new syntax that you have to worry about. But yeah, don't worry. We aren't writing actual objects ourselves very much. So yeah, don't worry about the actual syntax of this, and we'll just learn how to use these. Yeah, be able to recognize though that like variables can contain more than just like a number or a string. They can contain these kind of complex objects that contain in themselves a function or a property. So yeah, how do we use those objects and object functions and properties? We have this thing called dot notation, which allows us to either access the value of a variable inside of the object, or a function inside of that object. Does everyone kind of understand where the dot notation comes from? Great. Can anyone spot any maybe like more hidden uses of dot notation here? So yeah, one thing I might want to point out is the console.log. So that's also just an object, which is console, and we're calling a function called log. Yeah, so now back to how HTML and JavaScript meet up. They meet up in the DOM, which is an acronym for a document object model. So we have our document, which is an HTML file, something you guys should be familiar with at this point on the left side, which is made up of an HTML, a body tag, some H1, unordered list, whatever. And then on the right side, we have a diagram of what it might look like in code. So we have our document object, which is the kind of center, oh, sorry. It's kind of the center of where all of our JavaScript is going, and we can access each property in there. So we have a body property, and then the body property has an H1, and a UL inside of it, and then the UL has 3 LIs inside of it. Does this kind of make sense? Great. So the DOM is the document object model. When HTML is loaded, JavaScript creates its own kind of representation of what it's seeing, and it's made up of all of these objects. Yeah, and each HTML tag is an object itself. So yeah, there's only a few listed here of the hundreds of functions and properties that are on each of these objects here. But yeah, we won't go over all of them. Only a few are really important to us. But yeah, the key thing to note here is that each of these boxes is in themselves an object. So our first focus is going to be on document.getElementById, which is a function that's part of the document object. And it takes in one argument, which is a string, basically any text that we can come up with, which we want it to represent the ID of the HTML element that we want. So basically all that it's going to do is it's going to search through all of the objects that we have inside of our document and find the one that matches the ID. So, for example, we have our food list item element inside of our document. So if we call document.getElementById on food list, we'll find this object which represents this HTML code. So yeah, we can find some examples of like properties of element objects. So yeah, this is what's available to us right now because we did the document.getElementById here. And so something that we could do is we could console.log, which basically means just tell the computer or tell us, make the computer tell us what is this thing. And so we have our food list.classList, and that'll say blue box, because if you remember, our HTML shows that we have class equals to blue box. We can also show its inner HTML, which are those 3 LIs. We can console.log its children, which are 3 li objects. So yeah, this might be a little confusing on why we're even doing this in the first place. But yeah, recall some of the examples of the interactive features from last lecture. We can do with JavaScript, we can have, when the user clicks on an image, we increase that image's size. Basically, all that's doing is changing the CSS width. When a user clicks on a button, we can change the colors to dark mode, which just means changing the CSS color and background color. And yeah, the whole goal here is to convert these into code. Oops. So yeah, this button that we are talking about here can be converted into the getElementById. And the change CSS is something that we're going to cover. But yeah, we have another method here as well, which is document.querySelector, which is basically just a more broad version of getElementById. It takes in a CSS selector, those like dot whatever or hashtag whatever that you've been writing in CSS, and we just return the first object that matches that selector name. So yeah, it can function the same as getElementById, but it's a little bit broader in scope. So for example, we're using the query selector here in the same way that we used the getElementById earlier. Instead, the only difference is that we have to include this hashtag to specify that we're looking for an ID. Is there any questions about query selector or any of JavaScript so far? So yeah, there's another way we can get that food list, which is because food list is our only UL in the whole document, we can find just the first UL instance by looking for it in query selector. And what you'll want to notice here is that in this case, we don't have the hashtag because we're not looking for an ID called UL. We're just looking for the first UL element. Does that make sense to everyone? Great. So yeah, what happens if there's multiple repeated names? When we call query selector on .child, which is basically saying look for the class named child, then our only element is going to be the first child div and not the second child. Yeah, so onto kind of adding and removing CSS classes with JavaScript. This is where we can get that whole functionality of like a dark mode button or like an image that increases in size. So properties of properties. So yeah, turns out that the result of food list dot class list is not just a list, but it's another object. So now our code looks like this. So we have our document, we get element by ID of the food list, and we get our food list, and then we get the class list of that food list, and that gets us this class list, which is an object containing the functions of add, remove, and toggle. Does everyone understand kind of where we're coming from? Cool. So yeah, now we can change CSS with JavaScript because we have access to those add, remove, and toggle on our class list. So we have let food list equal to the get element by ID, which we did before. We can show the class list, which right now is just one thing, the blue box. But we can do food list.classlist.add and then dark mode, which then adds to this list, which is right now just blue box. We make it into blue box and dark mode. Yeah, so this is like assuming that we've already made a dark mode class, but this is essentially how we can add or remove CSS from a specific element purely through code. Does everyone understand the flow of things here? How we're getting the object first and then using it to change things about it? Okay. So we have these properties of properties. Essentially, all of this code here can be compressed into just this. So it's just a whole bunch of dots, and they chain together to form this like kind of one line to add a dark mode. And we can do the same thing with removing as well. So if we have a whole bunch of CSS on this one item and we want to just start removing off of it, we can remove dark mode, which then leaves us with just blue box. And yeah, so we can now kind of think of this interactively because we can call JavaScript interactively when people click on things or do other things with the page. So yeah, one thing we might want to do here is when the user clicks on an image or a button or a link, then we can add or remove HTML or CSS. And yeah, let's break down each one of these parts. So yeah, for the this button, or whatever it is, we can now specify an element if it has an ID. Any ideas on what function we might use to get it? Okay, in this case, it would be document.getElement by ID. And then we can also add, change, or remove the CSS, and that's with our classlist.add or remove. Next lecture, we're gonna add on this like click on part, which would make this entire thing work. And yeah, we can fully now interactively work with code and the HTML. Any questions about anything for the coding part? Cool. Okay, we're gonna move on to the design portion, which is on dark design. Hold on. Pause. And then
Okay, guys. So now we're going to move on to dark design patterns. So you guys might have heard of dark design before. There's this one video from Vox that discusses dark design in New York City or just cities in general. So if you've ever seen like benches with like these like really like short handles in between them just to like separate out the seats, that is an example of dark design. And so we're gonna like dive into how dark design entails to us as designers and how it kind of like splits the responsibility between the creator of a website or of a design and the user of that design. So let's get a little more technical. So defensive design is a term that basically is defined as how a user could be misusing a device and how we would want to prevent that. So for example, if we like create like ChatGPT or an AI that is like really powerful, yes, it can help a lot of people out with like solving like modern day problems, but it can also become a tool for like, I don't know, intended actions, I guess. And so that is what defensive design is, where we are trying to design in anticipation of our device being used in a potentially negative way for society. Yeah, okay. Then we have dark/unpleasant design, which is design that is purposefully trying to like trick you into doing a certain action, such as buying okay, I guess like the example on the slide is like buying insurance with a purchase where they like auto check it off for you, and then you have to like see it to like check it off if you don't want to be subscribed to that. Or if like when you're like buying something online and then it's like, hey, do you want to like sign up for our promotional services, and we're gonna like send you a bunch of emails and texts, and then you are like auto subscribe to that service. And so that is what dark design is. So a little bit more terminology. We have forced continuity, which kind of goes with, which is dark design, and is kind of like when you have a subscription to Netflix or to some streaming service, and they just continuously charge you without actually like making you aware of that charge. And that is what forced continuity is. And it makes it really difficult for you to like cancel these memberships, and sometimes like users will just be like, okay, I give up. I'm just gonna stay subscribed to this service. Then we have the bait and switch, where a user is being baited into buying a different product or is being suggested different products if the product that they were originally interested in is like basically sold out or doesn't even have like their size or what they want out of that original product. So if you're on Amazon, they might push you an item that you're potentially interested in, but they don't have your size. So then they're going to push you a bunch of other items that are similar to that current item you're looking at, so that you could be baited into purchasing that item instead. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, moving on. So now we're going to look at some designs that are potentially very bad. So let's watch through this GIF. And so at first, it kind of looks like an infinite loop. I mean, it kind of is an infinite loop because it is a GIF. But it's basically preventing you from entering the website if you don't allow notifications. So yeah, bad design, boo. You can't enter the website at all if you like just don't want to be notified from this website. And this isn't just limited to websites. We also see this in real life. So here are some examples of food. So on the left, we have a food wrap that isn't actually like a whole wrap. It's just two really small halves that are concealed by that middle like cardboard. And then we also have this like ham egg sandwich that doesn't actually have any meat in it. You can only see like the edge of it, and this is like actually like truly heinous. Another like example is like those like fruit sandwiches that like have cream in them, and like you like see the edge and you can see the fruits and it looks really nice, but then those fruits only like last for like the first like 1 inch of the sandwich and the rest of it is just pure cream. And so that is another example of dark design. Another one here is like white text where you can't unsubscribe. So like a lot of emails that do push out these like marketing campaigns to you without your consent give you the option to unsubscribe from these. And so this is kind of like taking advantage of that by making it like basically invisible to someone who's just like browsing the email with like recreational intent, I guess. Like they're not like trying to like find any like tricks in the email. So we see that here in the white text. And then we have like the auto like purchasing on your iPhone. Sometimes like I accidentally double click and then like it opens up my credit card to like buy an app on the App Store. And so I think it's probably more prevalent with like Touch ID where your thumb might just be on top of the home button and then it might just like scan. And then all of a sudden you have dropped $50 to buy a VIP membership. Another one that might be a little bit more applicable to us is in Snack Pass when they like auto charge you for one bag even though you don't necessarily need the bag. And so that's just like an additional 10 cents added to your purchase. And yeah, that's like, ew, like it still happens to me. It almost happened to me today. And so there's like a simple reason as to like why these like big companies want to use dark design is because they want us as users to be pushed into a certain action that will help them either drive sales, gather more data, or bump up their email lists. And so there's definitely like other reasons why we would be using dark design. But these like, we shouldn't be using dark design. Why companies would be using dark design. Sorry, rephrasing. But yeah, it's mostly intended to like push people into certain actions. And so this brings us into ethical concerns and like how we are dividing up the responsibility between the users and who is creating like these decisions for users to take, if that makes sense. So yeah. So this can range from like tips being like default added to like 18%, and then you have to like either like write out that you want to give a $0 tip if you don't want to tip, or writing out a custom tip. I know nowadays like sometimes I like get to the tip screen and then it's already at like 18%, and that's like the lowest I can tip, and I'm like, dang, that's kind of crazy for like having not interacted with anyone in this restaurant. And so it can range from that to something more notorious, such as Facebook just like data mining from its users. And so dark design is very prevalent nowadays. So what does this mean for us as aspiring web designers? So it means that we have a responsibility both to our brand that we're potentially working for and to the users that we are creating for. It's our job to create these user experiences, but it's also our job to stay transparent and like very mindful of the user experience. We as users ourselves have experienced a lot of these things, and so like hopefully we're able to stay morally good in these decisions, but ultimately that is also up to your own decision making of like whether you want to stay more loyal to a potentially negative experience that your brand wants to push, or if you want to stay true to a good user experience and straying away from dark design. So now let's just like think a little bit about some like dark patterns that we might see in our daily lives, and I would like 2 people to share. Anyone? it could even be like something that was already said, but in a different context. David.
Like when companies will offer you like cookies,
Mm,
and then the default option is to turn on all cookies, and like they're literally like marketing and like basically all of your data on that website is being sold to that cookie by default.
very good example. Thank you, David. Anyone else? Fantastic. I'll let you mull over that. Well, next we have this like article in Medium, which also low-key has dark design. If you can see my screen from here, like it like has like a subscription thing that like covers up 75% of the screen if you like try to open it, because they want you to sign up for their membership. And so like it's also like dark design in which they want you to sign up for this membership so you don't have to be reading an article with like a 1 inch, or that's exaggeration, like a 3 inch like view of the website. And so if you're interested in it, please like read it, digest it. I think dark design is a really interesting topic. Yeah, any questions about dark design? Okay, that is the end of like the content. But now we'll be talking about becoming a TA. And so why should you become a TA? It's a really great opportunity for you to like give back to the course if you like particularly had a good time taking this decal, and think that you've learned a lot and like think that you can help give back to other students who want to learn web design, then please apply. You're able to gain more experience in designing websites and in like getting a deeper understanding through helping other students. I know like for me personally, like when I came out of the class, I was like still like really like shaky on my own like knowledge, but then like becoming a TA and helping other students like try to understand their own code more was really helpful for me to like solidify my knowledge and become more confident in my web design abilities. You also gain teaching experience if you're interested in mentorship, and then this could also become like an extra section on your resume if you're interested in that as well. And yeah, I think it's just like in general a very gratifying experience. And yeah, also as a staff, we try to hang out and like get to know each other really well. I would like to say that this semester staff is pretty close. We've had like 2 socials, but also we were grading in the first half of those socials. But it was like really fun to just like talk with each other. So we highly encourage you guys to apply. It's just going to take an application. And so, why is it not updated? I updated it. So the application will be due in 8 days. So it'll be due on April 12th, Friday at 11:59 p.m. And then we will try to send out interview slots for the following week. And that interview will consist of a technical. So it's just going to be pretty basic, like, hey, can you do HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? Hopefully you can, because we've been spending the past 2 weeks doing it. And then just like a few design questions about like, oh, like what decisions would you make in these situations? And again, design is like very subjective. Design is very subjective, and so it doesn't have to be like too like, you don't have to worry too much about like what we like, just like as long as you have good reasoning, and like are trying to do your best. So that's all that we can ask of you guys. And yeah, so please apply. I hope you guys scan the QR code before I go to the attendance QR code. And yeah, so any questions about anything from today's lecture or in general? No? If not, here is the attendance form. David, what's today's word?
Today's word is dinosaur.
Okay, dinosaur. Okay. you guys are free to go. Reminder that the homework that was due today is due next week, and then this week's homework is also due next week. Sorry about that fumble on our part. And then also try to get your high fidelity mockup done by next Thursday as well. Okay, thank you.